Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're unpacking the absolute tragedy of Flydubai Flight 981. We are going to break down exactly how a cascade of tiny, seemingly manageable challenges totally snowballed into an unrecoverable disaster. It's a harrowing look at the intersection of technical failures and human factors. Let's get right into it.
Just imagine for a second sitting in a pitch-black cockpit. You're fighting severe turbulence on a dark and stormy night when suddenly this blaring life-or-death automated warning pierces the silence. Wind shear ahead. Wind shear ahead. It immediately grounds us in the incredibly high stakes these pilots were facing on the night of March 18, 2016. I mean, that sound literally means danger is imminent, and split-second decisions have to be made right then and there.
Part 1. A routine flight turns sour.
This was supposed to be just a standard 4.5-hour trip for the 55 passengers and 7 crew members on board this Boeing 737-800. But aviation is essentially a massive system of variables, and on this particular night, the variables were really stacking up against them. First off, both the captain and the first officer were highly experienced. We're talking nearly 6,000 hours of flight time each, but they had actually never flown together before. On top of that, the first officer had never even flown into Russia. But here's the real kicker. The plane was carrying 17 tons of fuel. That is way more than they needed for the trip. Why? Well, because fuel is cheaper in Dubai, the airline loaded enough for the return trip too. It's a super common practice called tankering. Now, as we're going to see, that extra fuel definitely gave them options, but it also kept them up in the air when they really probably should have just been on the ground.
Compounding the whole situation was a major difference in Russian air traffic control. So, in most of the world, altitude is measured in feet, and instruments are set relative to sea level. But in Russia, altitudes are given in meters, and instruments are often set to the airport's actual elevation. This meant the pilots had to use conversion tables on the fly. It's a prime setup for human error, right? And actually, on their very first descent, this difference caused the crew to miscalculate their altimeter by 280 feet. Now sure, it was a minor mistake, but it totally proves that the crew was already operating under a seriously heavy cognitive load in unfamiliar territory.
Part 2. The invisible threat.
As the plane descended toward Rostov-on-Don, their relatively calm automated flight was about to run headfirst into a violent atmospheric reality. The weather was just rapidly falling apart. Air traffic control relayed a terrifying weather warning, known as a SIGMET, detailing severe turbulence stretching all the way from the Earth's surface up to 15,000 feet. Severe turbulence isn't just a bumpy ride. It's so incredibly strong that it can cause pilots to temporarily lose complete control of the aircraft. It's an exhausting, physical battle just trying to keep the wings level. But the absolute worst threat they faced wasn't just the bumps. It was wind shear. Basically, wind shear is a sudden, violent change in the speed or direction of the wind over a very short distance. It is literally one of the most feared phenomena in all of aviation because it can instantly rob an aircraft of the lift it desperately needs to stay in the sky. If you detect it, you don't mess around. Pilots have to execute an immediate escape maneuver just to avoid crushing. And there is a stark, incredibly dangerous contrast between a normal aborted landing and a wind shear emergency. Let's break it down. In a standard go-around, pilots pull the landing gear up, they raise the flaps to 15 degrees to reduce drag, and they apply moderate thrust to just gracefully climb away. But a wind shear escape, that is a brute force survival tactic. You leave the landing gear down, you leave the flaps down at 30 degrees, and you absolutely slam the engines to maximum full thrust to just power your way out of danger. This technical difference is absolutely crucial. It's going to become the direct route of the impending disaster.
Part 3. To hold or divert.
After surviving a super chaotic first aborted landing because of that wind shear warning, the pilots had a massive decision to make. Did they wait out the storm or did they divert and fly to another airport? Well, because they were carrying all that extra tankered fuel, they didn't actually have to leave. So the crew spent 2 agonizing hours just holding in the sky, flying in circles in the dead of night. And during this time, they're listening over the radio as another flight, an Aeroflot plane, tried and failed to land 3 separate times because of the wind shear. Now, a diversion would mean hotel costs, delays, stranded passengers, the whole shebang. So trusting his experience, the captain decided to wait it out. Finally, after 2 hours, the weather showed slight signs of improvement and they decided to give it one more shot.
Part 4. The fatal second attempt. Think about the state they're in right now. They are totally exhausted, flying at 4 a.m., which is when human alertness is literally at its lowest point, and the crew begins their second descent. They were fully set up, but the severe weather had a trap waiting for them right near the runway.
As they were coming in, a massive wind gust suddenly slammed into the aircraft, rocketing their airspeed from an expected 153 knots all the way up to 166 knots in just seconds. This totally destabilized the entire approach. Recognizing the immediate danger, the captain instinctively called to abort the landing once again.
This exact moment resulted in a deadly miscommunication that completely doomed the flight. The captain saw that massive speed jump, treated it as wind shear, and immediately shoved the throttles to maximum thrust. However, out loud, he only vaguely called for a go-around. The first officer, hearing this, assumed it was a standard go-around, so he asked to retract the flaps to 15 degrees and bring the gear up. And the captain just agreed. The result was a terrifying aerodynamic hybrid. They suddenly had the sleek, low-drag profile of a standard go-around, but combined with the explosive maximum engine thrust of a wind shear escape.
Here's what that combination does. Because the engines on a Boeing 737 are mounted below the center of gravity, applying maximum thrust violently pushes the nose of the plane upwards. And now, with the landing gear and flaps retracted, there was no aerodynamic drag to hold the plane back. It literally shot skyward like a rocket. To stop the plane from just flipping backwards, the captain had to physically shove the control column forward with an immense 23 kilograms of pressure. And because his right hand was gripping the thrust levers, he was fighting this colossal force with just his left hand.
So the real turning point is how the captain tried to relieve this insane physical strain. Airplanes have a trim system. It's basically a small switch on the control column that moves the entire horizontal stabilizer at the tail to help adjust the plane's pitch. It is meant to be used in short, very brief clicks. But, exhausted, overwhelmed, and panicking, the captain held that manual nose-down trim switch for a staggering 12 seconds. That input told the tail of the plane to forcefully pitch the nose down, completely overpowering his own physical ability to correct it later. This massive, aggressive trim input plunged the climbing aircraft directly into a terrifying dive. The sudden, violent shift from a rapid climb to a steep descent subjected the crew to literal zero-G forces. Imagine being lifted entirely out of your seat while flying dust, dirt, and loose debris from the cockpit floor are violently thrown into the air, completely blinding you. In the dark, battered by physical forces they had never even experienced in the simulator, their situational awareness was completely, utterly destroyed.
Completely disoriented, the captain actually began pressing the rudder paddles, which is something rarely used in normal commercial jet flight, causing the aircraft to roll. The first officer saw the terrifying truth on his screens and desperately begged the captain to pull up, but the captain was locked into sheer tunnel vision. The aircraft was now corkscrewing toward the earth at a terrifying 18,000 feet per minute. Just to put that into perspective, that is 20 times the normal descent rate. At over 600 kilometers per hour, the plane slammed into the rimway.
Part 5, Lessons Learned from Tragedy. Everyone on board perished instantly in just a devastating loss of life. But, in aviation, every accident is heavily investigated so that it never happens again. This tragedy forced a massive, necessary reckoning across the global aviation industry. It highlighted some incredibly severe vulnerabilities in how pilots manage high-stress, high-workload situations. Following the crash, Flydubai and international regulators completely overhauled their training. They revised go-around procedures to guarantee crystal-clear communication between crew members. They vastly expanded training specifically on the manual stabilizer trim system, just to make absolutely sure pilots understand the sheer power of that little switch. And most importantly, they enhanced upset prevention and recovery training, basically putting pilots into rigorous simulators that actually mimic the extreme physiological shock, the heavy G-forces, and the utter chaos of low-altitude emergencies.
The story of Flight 981 highlights a really critical lesson for all of us. A single mistake rarely causes a disaster, but a chain of small, compounding errors under intense pressure, that absolutely can. Which leaves us to ponder this final thought regarding our own lives and professions. In high-stress situations, how can we build systems and habits that actually protect us from the cascading nature of human error when the pressure is truly on? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep questioning, keep learning, and I'll catch you in the next one.